Hey guys, this is Press Any Button. You just saw me montage through a lot of animation work, and I will show you the results of all my training. So that is pretty much what we have there. We're going to be working on, not just a melee animation today, because as I said, skipped through all that. We're actually going to be working on implementing our first attack, our first melee attack on the channel. So that's a big one for us. It's going to be a big challenge, and we're definitely not going to be able to use any prior knowledge that we've had before. I'm kidding. Sarcasm, because people can't understand my sarcasm. We're going to actually be using a lot of skills that we've used from the past to implement this new sophisticated way of interacting with our game. So without any further introduction, let's go into Unity. There you see it. I have my character and he's got that animation assigned to him. The whole thing's actually complete from my perspective, and I'll give you a preview right now. Alright, so here's the preview. Alright, so that's what we've got so far. You would have noticed there was a couple of things happening there, and I'm just going to go through and help you understand what we actually did. So let's jump back to Blender real quick to make sure that we can implement this animation properly. So I've got my animation here, and it's combo 1. I'm not going to open any other animations because Blender is treating me with all kinds of glitches. But back onto the point, so you're going to have to make a fake user in the action editor, as we've done before for that little animation there. And then we go into Unity, and you can see that I've got my animation right here. Well, I'm going to delete that, and no problem with that. We just simply go to our prefab. So I'm going to go to our characters folder, and then I'm going to click my cat final, and then you can see I've got my animation right there. It's called combo 1. I'm going to get rid of it just for demonstration purposes, and then I'm going to add it again, and see it wants to add run tilt right, but we're actually going to go for combo 1, and then it's just going to go with combo 1 right there, and we can actually preview what combo 1 looks like, and that's exactly what we need there. And then I go apply. Once it's finished loading and applying, what I do next is I go under my character, and that combo 1 is going to appear here. We just check it, make sure there's no issues with it, and then we just drag it into here, and there we are, combo 1. And then I make a couple of transitions and things like that, but we would be getting ahead of ourselves if we did that already. What was happening with my cat, and why was there a circle coming out of his arm? Alright, so commonly in video games we use things called hitboxes and hurtboxes when we're talking about melee. Now hitbox is the thing that belongs to the person making the attack. So think about in real life. Say you have a sword. We could say that the blade is the hitbox. That is the point where if you swing it and something touches that point, there's going to be some damage, right? So we need some kind of representation of that. So I thought, why not make a collider? And why not use methods that we've used in the past? What I've come up with is a solution that's overcome a couple of complex methods which I saw online. So we're simply just going to make a shot and destroy it really quick. That shot is going to come from our player, and it's just going to act as a collider. And then the extra stuff that we're going to do with that to make our enemy have a force backwards when we hit them and things like that is going to be what's going to make it really realistic. But this circle represents, our punch coming out. As you would have seen, it actually ended right at the point of my fist coming out. A little bit further is a bit more generous, and I might change the animation because of that, but we'll stick with what we have for now. So how do we set this up? It's very similar to what we've done in the past. So as you can see here, I have something called hit spawn. How did I make that hit spawn, and what is it for? Well, I right click, and then I create an empty game object. I set it as a child of my character, and then you edit the name there. I won't do much more than that because then we'll have things on top of things. But then you adjust the position of your hit spawn. Where do you want this hit to travel from? So this hit is going to travel out from our hit spawn, follow our arm, and reach a destination around about where our arm ends. And that's going to be, you know, the point of collision. Most things, you know, the point in collision could be a bit closer because, you know, our character might have their fist here, and then their fist ends here. So all throughout this, you're going to be able to hurt your enemy. This travels along just sort of how the power of the punch would travel along. So our hit spawn is here. You can see it from a front angle. It's lined up with the shoulder a little bit. Side angle, lined up, and over the top. It's going to be lined up with the arm. And what we can do is we can actually go to the animation window and then find our clip for our combo and just drag it out to the point where that fist has really reached its end. And you can see I've lined it up almost exactly with how high our punch is and, you know, the alignment of our punch. So that's where you want to have your hit spawn. What are we going to actually do with this hit spawn, you ask? Well, we're going to make a script for it. Now, before we actually touch that hit spawn and everything, we need something to actually spawn from that. And that is going to be a game object. It's going to be pretty much our collider that we're using. And we're going to have a nice representation of this as a sphere. So you'll have a sphere about yay big. If you change the size of your character, it's going to be a bit too big. So we'll just scale it down. I've scaled mine down to about 0.2. But that's pretty much all you need to do in terms of transformations for that. You don't have to think about like moving it over to your character because it's going to spawn from our hit spawn anyway. What we do need to do is make sure that our sphere collider is set to is_trigger. In this way, it's not going to collide with our character pushing them in any direction when it actually spawns from pretty much their back. We're just going to travel through. We only need the effect of the collider. We don't need the actual physics of the collider. And then we're also going to add a rigid body, and we're going to uncheck gravity, otherwise this thing is going to roll across the ground pretty depressingly. Now, everything's done for our sphere, except from one important thing. We need to tell Unity that we want this thing to travel, and which direction do we want it to travel in? Well, we want it to travel along the Z-axis, and the Z-axis, as far as Unity is concerned, is forward. So we're going to use transform.forward when we go to our script as the direction for our hit missile, our hit shot right now, and that's going to travel at a certain speed. And then after a certain time, we want this thing to just evaporate into nothingness, because we don't want it to travel super far, because that would mean that we're, you know, doing Dalsim combos over here. Our hitbox is going to go way further than what our unit is actually capable of, infinitely, if we don't have any destruction on that object. So let's take a look at what it should look like in the inspector for you guys. So I've got my sphere here. This is my prefab. I've got the script attached, which we haven't quite done yet. Rigid body, not using gravity, and is_trigger. So to create a script for this, we go to add component, and then we can go to new script, and you can create a new script. But I'm going to use my already existing script called punch missile. Okay, so here we have it, the punch missile, and it's very, very simple. Very simple, guys. We have a public float, and that's speed. We have another public float, that is our lifetime. Void start, we get component rigid body dot velocity equals transform dot forward. It's traveling along the z-axis, and this is going to happen by our speed. So our speed is going to be an integer that we're going to manipulate in the inspector. Then we go to void update destroy game object lifetime. So destroy game object after lifetime seconds. So lifetime is set to 3 right now. We don't want it as 3 seconds. I actually set mine to about, let's see, 0.1 seconds, because it's a very fast thing. It just travels out and then it stops, travels out, stops. The faster it gets destroyed, the shorter the distance for your punch. It's very simple logic. So because it's quite a short jab, our character doesn't have long arms, it's going to be a short duration. The lifetime of this object is going to be very short. It's going to travel at a speed of 10, which around about matches up with the speed at which the jab comes out and comes in. So the ideal is that once our jab is at full extension, our game object here is going to be in the same position as our jab as at full extension, and it's going to destroy itself once it reaches that point. And then when our arm comes in, the game object is already gone. Alright, so we have this fun little game object that destroys itself after a little bit. But what are we going to do with that? How are we going to apply it? Well, we go to our player movement script, and we're just going to go straight over to it in Visual Studio. And here are the features of our attack script. So it's just like a firing script. We have our punch rate, we have our next punch. So, you know, when you've seen us do this in previous tutorial, it's been our fire rate and our next fire. It's very much the same thing, really. So we have a public transform, which is hit spawn. We have a public game object, which is our hit missile. Our hit missile is, of course, our little punch missile, whatever we attach this script to. So that's that game object. We have a ball, which is punched, and we have a public float, which is hit momentum. Now, hit momentum is an interesting one because I decided we're going to add a force to our character once they take a punch. We want them to lunge forward a little bit just by themselves, and so that's why we have hit momentum there. Let's go down a little bit into void update, where we see how we actually punch. So the input is keycode.mouse 0. So that's my left click. You would have probably heard me clicking when I was demoing the punches. That's my left click. The next punch is time.time plus punch rate, instantiate. So all of these are just like, you know, figuring out the fire rate of our punches. Okay, now we deal with the fire rate of our punch, and then we instantiate an object. The object is hit missile at hit spawn.position at hit spawn.rotation. That's really important that we get the rotation in, otherwise it's just going to literally go along the z-axis, and that's not really what we need because the z-axis is actually a fixed position. It's like east or like west or something like that. So once we do it by hit spawn.rotation, it's going to instantiate relative to that and go forward relative to that rotation. So punched equals true, yeah, good stuff. And then player body.add force. So the state of punched becomes true, and that's going to be something that we're going to reference in the animator. If punched is true, then anim.setBall punched equals true, which means that we play that little animation clip of our character punching. Then we go back to this. We've already referenced the rigid body for our character previously. We're going to use that again. So player body.add force is transform.forward times hit momentum, and we'll be able to change what the hit momentum is because it's a public float, so we'll be able to do that in the inspector. I love my public floats. Then we have a little bit more, so we close those brackets and we go on to if get key up instead of get key down. We have key code mouse 0, so if our left click goes up, you know, we're not pressing it anymore. And punched equals false. If punched equals false, we set the animator to punched equals false. And that's how we're going to deal with our transitions there. anim.setBall, anim.setBall, true and false. And that's pretty much it for our attacking script. One thing that I did fail to mention is if you go to void start, you'll want to have punched equals false there. But otherwise, we should be good. Now we can return to Unity and see how we can add all that stuff together. So remember, I had my animation clip. Well, now I have the tools to make transitions from my idle animation to my animation clip. So I go make transition, I right click, make another transition, and then we select those transitions. And then before we make the conditions, we go to this little plus icon here because we need to make a new parameter. So our new parameter is going to be a bool, and it's going to be called punched in the same exact way as we called it in our script. Now we can go back to our conditions in the inspector. Once we have our transition highlighted, you go to punched and you say if punched equals true, we play this. And then if punched create a new condition, punched. If punched equals false, then we go back to our idle animation. Now let's see how that all plays out. Alright, so I'm clicking and nothing's happening. So why is that? It's because we still have our exit time. There we go. So we get rid of has exit time on our transition out from the idle animation. But we're going to leave has exit time for our transition back into our idle animation, because that means that our character's not going to just clip back into our idle animation really quick. I mean, we can experiment a little bit. I guess that works pretty good too. But yeah, my initial reasoning there was the idea that sometimes you have, you know, frame delays. So you'll be playing a fighting game and you kick. A light kick versus a heavy kick is going to, you know, take a couple more frames to come out. So you want that little bit of delay on the end of your moves. And so if we want to keep that delay, then we'll just, you know, keep this animation with has exit time. But that is all we have time for today, guys. Thank you so much for bearing with. This has been a very long part. I might chop it up a little bit, speed run through a couple of segments and all that stuff. But, you know, thank you for bearing with. It has been really good just figuring out this method for a simple hitbox, and hopefully in the implementation of this you'll be able to gain a better understanding of what it is that we're actually doing, because this is some crazy stuff that we're actually getting into right now. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, look at some previous videos. You might be confused at, you know, why I've got this cat with this Metal Gear Rising helmet doing jabs on my screen right now. You got to run it back and see the whole progression. There's so many other series that we've got on the channel and other ones that are gonna come soon, so please subscribe, comment, like, do all that good stuff. But most importantly, guys, press on and keep creating.